you have two aspects of it. Obviously, you have the production. Short term, there's some pressures, and they talk about a lot in the earnings call, but basically you have a shortage of supply with automobiles, and it's basically because there's a shortage in semiconductor chips. Created a huge slowdown in the production of light vehicles. So you can think cars, trucks, vans, SUVs. You can see it's coming back. What that's done for suppliers like ALV is it's really squeezed them. All the car manufacturers have had to do, all they've done is just raise the price of their cars that they're selling. So they're getting huge margins, even though they're not selling that much. They're getting huge margins. Key automotive suppliers like Autoliv here, they're getting squeezed because their costs are going up, but they're not able to pass that cost increase to these car vehicles because they're not really needed right now. They're not manufacturing as many cars. Eventually, that's going to change. And so that's why one thing you look at over the long term for these automotive suppliers is the production as far as LPVs go. So there's two aspects to that. You have the long term. I found it interesting. So since 1997, this light vehicle production has increased 1.9% annually. And so if you look at some of the population growth in more matured countries, someone like the United States as an example, population growth somewhere around 1%. And so it's slightly outpacing population growth, which kind of makes sense if you consider the fact that there are emerging kind of growth markets where cars weren't as prominent, but they are becoming that way. So if you think of India and China, those are two really great examples. So there's a lot of consolidation that's been happening in automotive. It's their top 10 customers make up 81% of sales. And that same group makes up 75% of global. If you really laser focus on like the little icons where it shows like these EV hybrid, you can see 6 out of these 9 key models are all hybrid electric. And so right now in that market with LPV, light vehicle production, don't see much for EVs. They're only about 10%. Obviously, that's expected to grow, and we are seeing it grow with people like Tesla and GM. That's going to be the first driver, obviously, is the automotive market. The second one for a company like ALV is going to be content per vehicle. And this is, again, similar with semiconductors, where you need more chips, the more data that comes in. So now they're dealing with all this automation stuff, and they're bringing in all this data so that the car can basically drive for you. So as an example, the developed markets like Western Europe, North America, Japan, and South Korea, those all have about $300 per vehicle in safety features, passive safety features. For the developing growth countries like China and India, it's more like $190. There's potential to grow and reinvest and see additional growth, even if the company doesn't steal any market share. The question remains is, how long are they going to be squeezed by this whole semiconductor thing? That's the biggest thing they talked about on the earnings call is, again, the fact that inventories on auto manufacturers are so low right now. So obviously their earnings call was just a few days ago. In North America, by the end of June, inventory for vehicles was 35% of normal. Obviously driving a lot of the higher prices you see, like the used car market right now is insane. The question with that becomes, is this going to be something that's more long-term or short-term? These fabs are very, very complex, and it's very high tech, and it needs special controls with temperature and everything. And it takes several years to ramp up production. So, TSMC, they're fine because, they're just raking in the profits. I don't see them as necessarily being super aggressive in adding capacity. They've always kind of shown to be one of those reliable, kind of conservative, kind of like they're going to be leading edge. They're going to be at the front of the tech, but they're not going to overbuild. And so, we might see a lot of overbuilding from other fabs and other foundries. And you would think that this would be a cycle like anything else, where eventually we're going to have an oversupply of chips and everything's going to cycle back the same way. We'll see. And, in the meantime, I think when you look at a company like Autoliv, going back to them, they're seeing about 1.3% of revenues is something that they projected as a margins hit for operating margins because of all the pressures on the cost side.
That's big.
It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is
that's
big
big.
because, when their operating margins are in the teens or something, you could be looking at 20-25% cut, right, in free cash.
Yeah.
In my mind, it's as much of a pressure as the demand pressure was last year. Something to keep in mind when you're looking at a company in the middle of the value chain that has customers. You got to look at customers, you got to look at suppliers, and you got to see how does that all fit in to the bottom line. But I mean, if you also are a leader in your industry, then your customers are gonna have a similar problem with you. That knife kind of cuts both ways, and so it's important to know what those forces look like and where those competitive advantages could be.